It was the dawn of September 1st, 1939. Across the tranquil farmlands and bustling towns of Poland, the summer air still hung heavy with a deceptive peace. Birds sang, farmers tended their fields, children laughed in the streets. But beneath that veneer of normalcy, a chilling, almost unthinkable betrayal was about to shatter a nation and plunge the world into a conflict unlike any it had ever known. This wasn't just another regional squabble. This was the brutal, calculated act that lit the fuse of World War II, a war that would redefine humanity's understanding of evil and resilience. Imagine a country, barely 20 years old, forged in the crucible of war and geopolitical upheaval, caught between two colossal, predatory empires. That was Poland, a proud nation resurrected after over a century of foreign domination. Its very existence was an affront to the old powers that had once carved it up. Its western borders, painstakingly drawn by the Treaty of Versailles in 1918, were still raw wounds for a Germany smarting from defeat. To the east, its hard-won independence from Soviet Russia in 1921 left a bitter taste in Moscow's mouth. Both Germany and the Soviet Union saw Poland not as a sovereign state, but as an illegitimate anomaly, a temporary obstacle to their grandiose territorial ambitions. They both harbored resentments, both nursed claims on Polish soil, like two hungry wolves circling a vulnerable lamb. Poland, in a desperate bid for self-preservation, had tried to play a dangerous diplomatic game. Non-aggression pacts were signed, with Moscow in 1932, with Berlin in 1934. These were not symbols of friendship, but fragile parchment barriers against an encroaching darkness. They were a mask, paper-thin, barely concealing the true intentions of its powerful neighbors. On one side, Adolf Hitler, the German dictator, obsessed with his twisted vision of Lebensraum, living space for the German people. He saw imperial expansion eastward as not just desirable, but existential. He yearned to reclaim the lands Germany had lost to Poland in 1919, viewing the entire Polish corridor and the free city of Danzig as rightfully German, an injustice to be rectified by force. His rhetoric was infused with a venomous desire to obliterate Poland and enslave its people. On the other side, Joseph Stalin, the Soviet dictator, a man whose intentions were a subject of chilling debate then, as they are now. Did he seek to reconquer the vast territories of the old Tsarist empire? Was he driven by a need to create a security buffer, pushing Soviet borders as far west as possible? Or was he simply a shrewd opportunist, ready to snatch any territory if the chance arose? Regardless of the precise motivation, the Soviet regime held a deep, ideological animosity towards Poles, viewing them as class enemies, as an obstacle to their global communist revolution. This animosity manifested in brutal purges, specifically targeting ethnic Poles within the USSR during the horrifying Great Terror of 1937 to 1938. The message was clear. Poland, in the eyes of both totalitarian giants, was a temporary aberration. The tectonic plates of European power shifted dramatically in 1938. The Munich Agreement, that infamous act of appeasement, saw Nazi Germany annex a part of Czechoslovakia. In a move that hindsight now judges with a heavy heart, the Polish government, hoping to secure its own position and perhaps thinking it was aligning with a rising power, also took a small slice of Czechoslovakia with German consent. It was a perilous dance with a devil they didn't fully comprehend. For years, Warsaw had viewed the Soviet Union as its most likely threat. But after Munich, Germany, emboldened and unchecked, unequivocally set its predatory sights on Poland. German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop began to hammer away at what he chillingly termed the German-Polish question. It wasn't a question, but a series of demands. The return of Danzig, that historically German city now overseen by the League of Nations and administered by Poland. Unimpeded German access to its exclave of East Prussia through the Polish corridor. Local German Nazis in Danzig, sensing the impending shift in power, ratcheted up unrest, creating a climate of manufactured grievance. The semi-authoritarian Polish government, led by Prime Minister Felicjan Składkowski, looked desperately to France and Britain, and the promises came. Both governments pledged to support Poland if Germany attacked. But promises, as history would tragically show, were not always worth the paper they were written on. By the summer of 1939, war felt like an inevitable storm on the horizon. Polish military commander Marshal Edward Rydz-Śmigły, sensing the gravest danger, articulated the nation's resolve. We want to exhaust all possible efforts for a peaceful solution to the Danzig question. But if Germany insists on its annexation plan, Poland will fight, even if alone and without allies. The entire nation, to the last man and woman, is ready to fight for Poland's independence. And if we say we are going to war because of Danzig, it is a fight for our independence. His words were a defiant roar in the face of overwhelming odds, a testament to the Polish spirit, yet a chilling prophecy of the isolation to come. Hitler, in his megalomaniacal delusion, scoffed at the idea that Britain and France would honor their word. But even he wasn't reckless enough to risk a two-front war. His solution was a stroke of cynical genius, a diplomatic earthquake that sent shockwaves across the globe. A deal with the Soviets. It was a pact born of pure, unadulterated cynicism. Nazism and communism, two ideologies diametrically opposed, sworn enemies on every conceivable front, now found common ground in their shared desire to dismantle the existing European order and expand their respective empires. On August 23, 1939, the world watched in stunned disbelief as Germany and the Soviet Union, represented by their foreign ministers Molotov and Ribbentrop, signed a non-aggression pact. It was an alliance of convenience, a devil's bargain that would forever stain the pages of history. But the real horror lay not in the public declaration, but in a secret protocol attached to the pact. With cold, detached precision, they carved up Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. Germany would have free reign in what was left of Czechoslovakia, Western Poland, and Lithuania. The USSR, in turn, was given a blank check for Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Eastern Poland, and Bessarabia. Sovereign nations, reduced to chess pieces on a map, their fates decided by two dictators in a smoky room. The stage was set. The sacrificial lamb was Poland. In the final days of August, to provide a flimsy pretext for the invasion, the Germans staged a series of chilling false flag operations along the Polish border. The most infamous was the Gleiwitz incident. Men of the SS Security Service, under the chillingly efficient Reinhard Heydrich, dressed in Polish uniforms and raided a radio station at Gleiwitz, a customs post, a railway station, a gamekeeper's hut, and a few other targets. They even brought with them 4 unfortunate men from the Sachsenhausen concentration camp, along with a local Polish sympathizer. These innocent souls were dressed in Polish uniforms, murdered in cold blood, and then photographed as evidence of Polish aggression against Germany. The sheer audacity, the cold-blooded premeditation of such an act, speaks volumes about the moral abyss into which the Nazi regime had descended. The fact that most of these staged operations didn't even work as planned was utterly overshadowed by the thunderous roar of the coming invasion. The German invasion plan, codenamed Case White, was a masterpiece of modern warfare, designed for speed, encirclement, and overwhelming force. 2 German armies would strike from the north, closing the Danzig corridor and driving south from East Prussia towards Warsaw. 3 more armies would surge north towards the Polish capital and east towards Lwów, modern-day Lviv. To further facilitate this rapid advance, the German-aligned Slovak state, newly independent and subservient to Berlin, allowed German troops to use its territory as a springboard. The strategy was clear. Armored and motorized divisions, operating in concert with the terrifying might of the Luftwaffe, would punch through Polish lines, trap their slower forces west of the Vistula River, and paralyze their ability to resist. The statistics of the impending clash were stark, a testament to the colossal imbalance of power. Germany assembled a staggering 1.5 million men, 3,200 armored vehicles, and 2,000 planes. While many of their tanks were lighter Panzer I and II models, or Czech models acquired through annexation, they still boasted 300 modern Panzer III and IV tanks, designed for swift, decisive combat. Out of their 50 divisions, 6 were armored and 4 motorized, a harbinger of the Blitzkrieg to come. The rest, a stark reminder of the transitional nature of warfare in 1939, still relied on horse-drawn transport. 3 Slovak divisions would also join the German juggernaut. Opposing this overwhelming force were approximately 1 million Polish soldiers, organized into 38 infantry divisions, 1 motorized, and 11 cavalry brigades. They possessed 1,100 armored vehicles, but nearly all were small, outdated models, no match for the German panzers. They desperately lacked modern anti-tank weapons, and their air force, with around 750 older aircraft, was woefully outmatched and quickly overwhelmed. Poland's preparations for war were further hampered by a desperate plea from its supposed allies. At the urging of Britain and France, Poland delayed full mobilization, fearing it would provoke Germany and offer Hitler an even clearer pretext for war. This fatal delay meant that by September 1st, a mere half of Polish units were in their assigned defensive positions, a critical vulnerability in the face of Germany's lightning-fast assault. The Polish military high command faced an impossible dilemma. Their forces were weaker, their equipment inferior. Concentrating their forces in a strong defensive line risked leaving vast, valuable territories and resources unprotected. Spreading their forces too thin to defend the entire lengthy border, however, meant they would be unable to stop the enemy anywhere. In a desperate gamble, they opted for an all-round defense, a thin, stretched-out line hoping to resist just long enough for their French allies to launch their promised offensive, a forlorn hope scheduled to begin 15 days after French mobilization. Then came the moment of impact. The morning of September 1st. Hitler, with breathtaking audacity, falsely accused the Polish army of firing onto German territory and announced to the world that Germany was merely returning fire. It was a brazen lie, a cynical inversion of truth, designed to justify the unjustifiable. German forces, without a declaration of war, streamed across the border. The tank divisions, the vanguard of the new Blitzkrieg, aimed to break through, penetrate as far and as fast as possible, to encircle and isolate the slower Polish infantry into vast, suffocating pockets. The sky became a canvas for terror. Aircraft like the infamous Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers screamed down, their sirens wailing, unleashing hell on Polish positions, logistics hubs, and communications centers. Their mission, to paralyze enemy command and control, to sow chaos and fear from above. Other German bombers rained destruction upon Polish cities, not just for military objectives, but with the deliberate, chilling intent to terrorize the civilian population into submission. The very fabric of Polish life was being ripped apart. Some of the first shots of this new global conflict were fired not on land, but from the sea. The German warship, Schleswig-Holstein, supposedly on a friendly visit to Danzig, unmasked its true purpose. Its heavy guns opened fire, supporting the German assault on the small Polish military outpost on the Westerplatte Peninsula. The garrison of 180 Polish troops, caught by complete surprise, resisted with a ferocity that defied belief. Outnumbered, outgunned, and with no hope of relief, they held out for a week, finally surrendering on September 7th. Their courageous stand became a symbol of Polish defiance, a testament to the unyielding spirit of a nation under siege. Though the Germans rapidly broke through Polish lines in many places, the myth of an immediate, effortless German victory is just that, a myth. Many Polish units resisted fiercely, holding up the German advance with remarkable courage and ingenuity. At Mokra, a Polish cavalry division, against all odds, managed to hold up German tanks. And at Krzyżanty, an action occurred that gave rise to one of the most enduring, yet deeply inaccurate myths of the campaign, that of Polish cavalry senselessly charging German tanks. What truly happened was a tragic ambush. German tanks, emerging from cover, surprised a Polish unit of Ulan Lancers who were bravely advancing to attack a German infantry unit. The Lancers, on horseback, suffered heavy casualties. An Italian war correspondent, speaking to German tankers the next day, embellished and dramatized the story, turning it into propaganda headlines across Germany. It was a convenient narrative, portraying German technological superiority and, implicitly, Polish fanaticism or foolishness. It served to dehumanize the enemy and glorify the conqueror. Even amidst the brutality, there were fleeting glimpses of shared humanity, swiftly buried by the machinery of war. German war correspondent Kurt Frohwein reported a sanitized, yet poignant, version from the front. This was the first Polish soldier I set eyes upon, a bloody lump of human suffering, his legs drawn to his breast in pain, his face greenish and pale. We unbuttoned his blood-soaked tunic, and the German medic gave him a canteen of water. For the last time, a painful smile spread across his face as he whispered the German word, Danke. He died soon after, and now rests under a decorated wooden cross. A solitary act of compassion in an ocean of brutality. A reminder of the individual human tragedies that unfolded across the vast landscape of war. Behind the lines, Polish command and control struggled desperately to keep pace with the bewildering speed of the German advance. Communications were shattered, units were isolated, and the situation at the front changed by the hour. On September 3rd, Polish Minister for War General Kasprzycki issued the order for the defense of Warsaw. But the shock of the German lightning advance was profound. Many Polish formations found themselves trapped in pockets of varying sizes, surrounded and cut off. They resisted as long as they could, with desperate courage, but shortages of food and ammunition, coupled with relentless aerial attacks, meant they could not hold out indefinitely. On September 3rd, as the Polish army grimly prepared to defend its capital, a beacon of hope, however faint, flickered to life. Britain and France, finally honoring their pledges, declared war on Germany. For many Poles, it felt like salvation, a promise that they would not be left to fight alone. Halina Regulska, a civilian in Warsaw, recalled the joyous, albeit fleeting, euphoria. We embraced each other, kissed, hugged, and danced. Long live England! Now we won't die in this unequal fight. A few hours later, France declared war on Germany. In Warsaw, there's enthusiasm and demonstrations. Hope, even in the darkest hours, is a powerful force. But that hope was built on a fragile foundation. The promised French offensive, the Grand Relief, was still 2 weeks away. 2 weeks, in the context of Blitzkrieg, was an eternity. In the interim, the German advance continued with terrifying speed. Krakow, a city steeped in history and culture, fell without a fight on September 6th. By the 8th, German spearheads had reached the very outskirts of Warsaw, the capital itself. Though Polish troops initially prevented them from entering the heart of the city, the ferocity of the urban combat took the Germans by surprise. A German report reflected their difficulties. It was pointless to try to break through here. The brigade ordered a retreat. Slowly, with their turrets facing rearwards, the tanks pulled back, giving each other covering fire. Riflemen, some of whom had panicked and retreated too early, blocked their path. On the tanks' hulls lay dead and wounded. The order to retreat didn't reach many of the tanks, and they were left behind. This was not the effortless march of triumph the propaganda claimed. On September 9th, west of Warsaw, in a desperate act of defiance, Polish forces trapped in a large pocket launched a major counterattack at the Battle of the Bzura. It was the heaviest fighting of the entire campaign, a brutal, desperate struggle. They aimed to push the Germans back, to break out of the encirclement, and to prevent Warsaw from being completely surrounded. The battle was a testament to Polish courage and tactical ingenuity, forcing the Germans to divert troops away from Warsaw. Some Polish units, fighting their way through the chaos, managed to escape to the capital, bringing vital reinforcements and morale. But the overwhelming German pressure on the ground, combined with relentless aerial attacks from the Luftwaffe, eventually reduced the Bzura pocket within about a week. Around the same time, the last Polish defenses in the north, at Wisna, fell after a heroic stand against impossible odds. Day by day, more Polish pockets surrendered. By September 15th, German forces had fully encircled Warsaw. The Germans, confident of swift victory, demanded the city's unconditional surrender. The Poles, battered but unbowed, refused. The German High Command, ever cautious, worried that the Poles might attempt to form a new defensive line in the east, somewhere between Brest-Litovsk and Lwów. But German forces, relentlessly driving eastward, reached Lwów first, further dashing any hopes of a unified Eastern Front. Meanwhile, the skies above Poland continued to rain death. German planes relentlessly pounded Polish cities, none more so than Warsaw. The civilian population endured unimaginable horrors. On Groschow Boulevard, jammed with traffic, German fighters hunted from 100 meters up and fired with machine guns on refugees, military units streaming into Warsaw, and women on their way to pick potatoes in the fields. The corpses and horse carcasses lay in the street until evening, since another attack might start at any moment. This chilling account paints a picture of deliberate terror targeting the most vulnerable. With Warsaw surrounded and the Polish army in tatters, Poland's faint hopes rested entirely on the promised French offensive. But instead of a full-scale assault on Germany's weakly defended Western Front, a move that might have shifted the course of the war dramatically, the French and British did little. The French made a limited, almost symbolic advance for a few days, then withdrew to the safety of their formidable Maginot Line. It was a monumental failure of nerve, a catastrophic miscalculation that left Poland abandoned and sealed its fate. The term phony war, or Sitzkrieg, would later be applied to this period, but for the Poles, it was anything but phony. It was a brutal, existential fight for survival. Then, on September 17th, the unthinkable happened, compounding Poland's agony and sealing its doom. The Soviet Union, true to its secret pact, joined the fighting on the German side. For the Germans, Soviet entry couldn't have come soon enough. They had been pressing Moscow to join from the first days of September, concerned about the potential for British and French intervention. Although Moscow had allowed the Germans to use naval facilities at Murmansk and radio stations for the Luftwaffe in Minsk, they needed time to mobilize their vast forces and to conclude their own border conflict with Japan in Mongolia. The Wehrmacht's quicker-than-expected advance, however, made Stalin anxious. He worried his new partner might not respect their secret deal, and he wasn't about to let Hitler gobble up all the spoils. The Soviets, ever mindful of appearances, also wanted to avoid being seen as full aggressors. So, they concocted a transparent pretext. Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov handed the Polish ambassador in Moscow a note filled with cynical lies. The Polish government has disintegrated and no longer shows any sign of life. This means that the Polish state and its government have, in point of fact, ceased to exist. The Soviet government also cannot view with indifference the fact that kindred Ukrainian and Belarusian people who live on Polish territory and who are at the mercy of fate should be left defenseless. The reality, of course, was that the Polish government and army both still existed and were fiercely resisting the Germans. It made little difference. Red Army orders urged the troops to the aid of workers and peasants rebelling against their Polish landlords, a rebellion that existed only in Soviet propaganda. 2 Red Army fronts, comprising about 470,000 men, 4,000 tanks, 5,500 guns, and 2,000 aircraft, surged across Poland's eastern border. Facing them were approximately 350,000 Polish troops, many of whom were unarmed reservists, desperately short of heavy weapons and ammunition, and already reeling from the German onslaught. Many Poles were taken by complete surprise, utterly bewildered by the sudden appearance of Soviet forces. Some, like Janusz Bardach, clung to a desperate, fleeting hope. 2 men shined flashlights in our eyes, while others surrounded us. I was astonished to see Soviet military uniforms and hear the Russian language. We were still a long way from the border. I couldn't imagine what Soviet soldiers were doing on Polish territory, and could only hope that the mighty Red Army had come to fight the Nazis and expel them from Poland. I wanted to express my joy at seeing them, but someone ordered us to put up our hands. The crushing realization that the Soviets were not liberators, but yet another invader, must have been soul-destroying. Some local populations, particularly ethnic Ukrainians, Belarusians, and Jews, did initially welcome the Soviets, hoping they would be better treated than by the often discriminatory Polish authorities. Fighting was limited in many areas, a reflection of the Poles' exhaustion and the sheer impossibility of fighting on 2 fronts simultaneously. Yet, pockets of fierce resistance emerged. At Grodno, Polish troops, armed with Molotov cocktails and machine guns, bravely fended off Soviet tanks for 2 days. At Lwów, already besieged by the Wehrmacht, but falling within the Soviet sphere, German and Soviet commanders briefly considered a joint assault before the Germans, respecting the terms of their secret pact, withdrew. On September 22nd, in a chilling display of cooperation, German and Soviet troops held a joint parade in Brest-Litovsk. Victory arches were erected, adorned with both swastikas and red stars, a grotesque tableau of totalitarian unity. The ceremony was observed by senior generals from both sides, including the German tank commander Heinz Guderian and the Soviet general Semyon Krivoshein, a Jew who chatted together in French. It was a scene that etched itself into the memory of a shocked world. London and Paris were appalled by Soviet actions, condemning the invasion. But paralyzed by fear and lacking the stomach for a wider conflict, they did nothing. They simply could not risk war with the USSR on top of the war with Germany. British ambassador in Moscow, William Seeds, articulated the grim reality, however personally distasteful. I do not myself see what advantage war with the Soviet Union would be to us, though it would please me personally to declare it on Mr. Molotov. Pragmatism, or perhaps cowardice, won the day. Poland was abandoned, left to the mercy of two brutal empires. As the German and Soviet armies tightened their grip on most of Poland, they swiftly imposed a reign of terror in their occupied zones. They both insisted that the Polish state no longer existed, a convenient fiction that stripped Polish citizens of any rights or protections under international law. In the Nazi-occupied zones, the ideology of racial superiority immediately reared its ugly head. Slavic Poles and Polish Jews, who constituted a significant 10% of the population, were deemed Untermenschen, subhumans, fit only for enslavement, forced labor, mass murder, or expulsion. SS Commander Reinhard Heydrich, an architect of the Holocaust, emphasized that the immediate priority was the elimination of the Polish elite. The people must be shot or hanged immediately without trial. The little people we want to spare, but the nobles, priests, and Jews must be killed. It was a chilling declaration of intent, a prelude to the horrors that would define the occupation. But it wasn't just the SS committing atrocities from the very start of the campaign. Some ethnic German civilians living in Poland, emboldened by the invasion, formed militias and eagerly joined in the crimes. Special Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing squads, ruthlessly targeted Polish Jews and intellectuals for summary executions. In Przemysl, for instance, an Einsatzgruppe shot 500 Jews in mid-September. Regular Wehrmacht units, despite later attempts to distance themselves from Nazi atrocities, were also deeply implicated. They killed Polish prisoners and civilians. Army commanders like Franz Halder would later recount the chilling clarity of the Nazi leadership's purpose. It was the intention of the Führer and Göring to destroy and exterminate the Polish people. In the town of Częstochowa, troops from the 42nd Division massacred about 1,000 civilians, including 150 Jews, on the false pretext that civilians were firing on German troops. Helena Spielmann, a survivor, witnessed the horror. On the town square were gathered several thousand people, men, women, and children. The whole square was surrounded by German soldiers who held their rifles at the ready. They thoroughly searched the Polish and Jewish men. If they found a razor blade, shaving knife, or pocket knife, the man in question was brought to a nearby air raid trench and immediately shot. The meticulous barbarity, the pretense of order in arbitrary murder, was a chilling hallmark of Nazi terror. Similar massacres occurred elsewhere, almost always on the pretext of mostly imaginary partisan actions by civilians. In total, the Germans executed an estimated 12,000 to 15,000 Poles during the 5-week campaign, not including the countless civilian victims of aerial bombing. On October 4th, Hitler, with characteristic impunity, announced an amnesty for all Germans who had committed war crimes in Poland. The message was clear: there would be no justice. The Soviets, in their occupied zone, were no less brutal. They swiftly began their own systematic suppression of Polish society. Polish community leaders, army officers, businessmen, wealthy farmers, landowners, and civil servants were rounded up, shot, or imprisoned. Soviet authorities deported hundreds of thousands to forced labor camps in the vast gulags of the Soviet Union. Prisoners were frequently executed. After the brief battles of Grodno and Lwów, Soviet troops summarily executed several hundred Polish defenders. Amidst this dual invasion, the fabric of Polish society began to fray in places. In some incidents, Poles turned violent against their ethnic German fellow citizens. In one tragic event at Bydgoszcz, enraged Poles killed 223 ethnic Germans. and the overall total might have been as high as 6,000. These acts, horrific in themselves, were often fueled by years of simmering ethnic tension, the immediate chaos of invasion, and the horrifying accounts of German atrocities already committed. As the Germans and Soviets rapidly imposed their iron rule, Polish military resistance entered its final desperate phase. By late September, only a few isolated pockets still held out. The Modlin fortress, the small but tenacious pocket at Koch, and most importantly, Warsaw. The Polish government, recognizing the futility of remaining, fled to neutral Romania and then to France to establish a government in exile, a symbol of defiance against the occupation. The Germans, eager to claim Warsaw as quickly as possible, found themselves facing unexpected challenges. They had assigned too few units for the task, having underestimated the Polish resolve and the difficulties of urban warfare. The 180,000-man Polish garrison, though desperately low on ammunition and heavy weapons, fought back with fierce determination. They used the urban landscape, the rubble of bombed-out buildings, and hastily erected street barricades for cover, turning every street and every building into a fortress. One account from the German 10th Division vividly described the tenacity of young Polish soldiers. About 30 military cadets, gunners, dug in a field gun and sat in a cellar next to it. If one of our tanks or assault guns appeared, a crew jumped up and fired until they were killed. Then came the next ones. This single gun demolished 3 German assault guns and 1 field gun. It was a testament to raw courage against overwhelming technological superiority. The Luftwaffe, however, continued its relentless campaign of terror from above. The city was bombed heavily, power stations targeted, the water system destroyed, electricity infrastructure crippled. There was no power, no water. Civilian Helena Regulska recalled the harrowing scene. Above us raged an inferno. One plane after another dove down onto us, and every time it seemed to us that this time we'd be hit. This expectation of death made our hearts stand still. On September 25th, the terror reached its peak with the biggest aerial bombing attack in history to that point. 370 German planes dropped incendiary bombs, deliberately designed to start massive fires, engulfing the city in flames. Overall, the bombing campaign killed an estimated 40,000 Warsaw residents, turning the capital into a landscape of ruins and despair. Warsaw's mayor, Stefan Starzyński, became a voice of desperate defiance, broadcasting appeals to Britain and France over the radio. In his initial pleas, there was still a hint of hope, a desperate plea for the promised aid. And you, our allies, who promised us help and swore you would stand by us no matter what are you doing? That is what the dead and dying are asking. But by September 26th, his tone had shifted, hardened by unimaginable suffering and the bitter taste of betrayal. For the last time, I call on our allies. I am not asking for help. There's no time for that anymore. I demand revenge. For the churches reduced to ashes, for the tears and blood of the innocent dead, for the suffering of those torn apart by bombs, burned up by phosphorus shells, or suffocated in collapsed cellars and bunkers. May all broadcasters who hear us, especially the French, repeat to the entire world, Warsaw is fighting. Poland is not yet lost. It was a cry from the depths of hell, a defiant roar against an indifferent world. But the siege of Warsaw, however heroic, could not last. Water shortages, the terrifying risk of disease, and the utterly hopeless military situation forced the Poles to surrender on September 28th. Soon after, Modlin Fortress, another bastion of Polish resistance, also gave up. The pocket at Koch, however, held out until October 6th, marking the very last gasp of organized Polish resistance in the campaign. The Germans, basking in their victory, held a triumphal parade in Warsaw, meticulously filmed by the infamous Nazi director Leni Riefenstahl, eager to capture the image of an invincible Wehrmacht for propaganda purposes. The remnants of the Polish army, those who hadn't been killed, captured, or demoralized, attempted a desperate escape to neutral neighboring countries. Between 80,000 and 200,000 men miraculously succeeded, a testament to their resilience and determination to continue the fight. On their way, some units, like that of Captain Romuald Galicki, ran into armed opposition not from the invading armies, but from unfriendly civilians, an echo of the inter-ethnic fighting that had plagued the region for 2 decades prior. We march at night. There is no contact with the enemy. On the way, Ukrainian bands in villages Stepan, Manevitcha, and Ratno were liquidated. The scars of history ran deep, even in the midst of a new catastrophe. The Polish campaign was over. Nazi Germany and the USSR had achieved their immediate goals, ruthlessly carving up a sovereign nation. Stalin, with chilling satisfaction, would soon declare their friendship is sealed in blood. They even agreed to modify their zones of control, with Germany gaining more of Poland and access to vital Soviet raw materials needed for its impending war with France and Britain, while the Soviet Union solidified its sphere of influence by incorporating Lithuania. Moscow would soon offer Vilnius, the historical Lithuanian capital, to Lithuania, which reluctantly accepted, a bitter price for nominal autonomy under Soviet shadow. The Germans also, as a cynical gesture, gave a small piece of Polish territory to the Slovak state. The speed and destruction of the German victory was expertly exploited by Nazi propagandists to create the myth of an all-powerful Wehrmacht, an unstoppable war machine. This contributed heavily to the enduring, albeit misleading, myth of Blitzkrieg as a deliberate, fully developed doctrine. In reality, the German High Command, in private, harbored significant concerns. Many felt the army had been rushed into war by the political leadership before it was truly ready, and they judged its performance and munitions stocks to be insufficient for a protracted war with Britain and France. The so-called Blitzkrieg was less a perfected doctrine and more a daring, high-risk improvisation that happened to succeed against a weaker, isolated opponent. The human cost was staggering. The German military suffered approximately 15,000 dead, 30,000 wounded, and 3,400 missing. They also lost 217 tanks, nearly 10% of those deployed, a casualty rate that would have been far higher against a peer opponent. The Red Army, entering later and facing less resistance, lost about 750 dead and 1,800 wounded. Polish losses, however, were catastrophically higher, between 70,000 and 120,000 military dead, 130,000 wounded, 700,000 prisoners taken by the Germans, and 220,000 prisoners taken by the Soviets. The civilian toll was equally horrific, with between 100,000 and 200,000 Polish civilians killed during the 5-week campaign alone. But as much as Poland's people had suffered during the dual invasion, these initial horrors were merely a grim prelude. The true nightmare, the unspeakable suffering of the occupation, both on the German and Soviet side, would soon bring much, much worse. The invasion of Poland in 1939 was not merely the start of a global war. It was the brutal annihilation of a nation's sovereignty, a chilling demonstration of unchecked power, and a harrowing testament to the devastating consequences of betrayal and isolation. What, then, is the enduring lesson we can draw from this tragic chapter of history? It's a multifaceted one, echoing across the decades. First, it's a stark reminder of the perils of appeasement and diplomatic naivety in the face of expansionist ideologies. When evil declares its intentions, it must be confronted, not accommodated. Second, it highlights the profound dangers of unchecked totalitarianism, where human life is devalued, and entire nations become mere bargaining chips in a ruthless game of power. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact serves as a timeless warning against the cynical alliances born of mutual predation. But perhaps most powerfully, the story of Poland in 1939 is a testament to the unyielding spirit of a nation, its incredible resilience in the face of unimaginable suffering. Despite being crushed by two superpowers, despite the betrayal of its allies, the Polish people refused to surrender their identity, their culture, or their hope for freedom. Their defiance from the Westerplatte to the streets of Warsaw fueled an underground resistance that would endure throughout the brutal occupation. It reminds us that while physical conquest can shatter borders and oppress populations, it cannot extinguish the human desire for liberty and self-determination. The fall of Poland was a cataclysm, not just for its people, but for the world. It signaled the end of an era and the beginning of a new, terrifying one, where the rules of warfare and humanity itself were irrevocably altered. And as we look back, we are compelled to remember, to learn, and to vow that such a confluence of unchecked ambition and cynical betrayal should never again be allowed to unleash such darkness upon the world. The memory of Poland, caught between two monsters, must forever serve as a beacon, guiding us to recognize the fragility of peace and the eternal vigilance required to protect the sovereignty and dignity of all nations.